podcast. With me today is Josh McLean from Portland, Oregon. He's an author, coach, and speaker, and has the website Catalyst Ignite, which is probably one of the coolest names I've heard of for a website in a while. Welcome, Josh.
How's it going?
It's going well. What's the weather like there? Because you're in northern U.S. It was minus 21 when I woke up this morning.
Oddly enough, Portland is preparing for potential snow ice apocalypse. So there's a lot of school events were already canceled for tonight, and we're preparing for the unknown tomorrow, which means in traditional, in Portland, Oregon, so it could be black ice or it could be 65. We're not quite sure.
Excellent. The last time I was in Portland was, I think, around December 8th, 2016, and they had a big ice storm.
Yes. Yeah.
Shut down the city for the day, and we ended up leaving and heading back to Canada, but no one was on the streets. And we found out that day there's only 2 sand trucks or snow plows in all of Portland. And I thought, wow,
yeah,
we are far from home here in Canada.
We've tried to change that a little bit because of the couple weather events that have hit us. So far we prepared because of getting hit like that, but we have not had to pull it out this year. So kids are bummed because there's no school days. So they're kind of, every kid is rooting for a snow day tomorrow.
Yeah, I remember the days. Well, that was a good lead in, but we'll get down to business. But thanks for sharing, Josh.
Yeah.
So you have a book out called Catalyst. Tell me about your book and, what you're speaking about. But even before we get to the book, let me ask you, because everyone has kind of a motivation or a founder's story that brought them into the business of being an author, coach, and speaker. I'd love to hear yours. I know a little bit about it, and it's a very interesting one. And, hearing kind of the backstory of what you've done and what you're doing now, share with the listeners kind of your motivation and founder story.
Yeah, I say in my book that my life story is a little bit of after-school special material. And what I mean by that, there's probably been 3 major inflections point. I'll kind of give you the high level, and we can dig in as necessary. I grew up as a only child in a single mother home who she was literally told women don't belong in the workplace. So she just had to grind and grit it out. And I kind of observed that behavior and just that ethic, even though she never told it to me directly. I just observed that in her. But growing up, I didn't really have any mentors or anybody who was kind of speaking into my life, and that allowed fear and false identity to flourish. And I basically ran from opportunity, and I used drugs and alcohol to kind of mask just the all that emotional turmoil, if you would. And so that really became my identity even out of college. And at one of my first jobs, I literally went to work drunk, not just having a drink, but I showed up to work just absolutely drunk. And that was my first rock bottom moment where I said, hey, pause, pump the brakes. Something is horribly wrong in my life's trajectory. So I kind of just went into this cocoon for a moment, came out, and I attempted to basically take the phone book and rip it apart to say, you know what, that past isn't who I am. It's not part of who I am, my identity. And I tried to almost stuff it and forget about it. And I did. So I switched from drugs and alcohol to wearing a shirt and tie, thinking that cleaning up the exterior would be the salvation, if you would. And I played the corporate guy. I stumbled into finance and loved numbers, and that kind of journey took me through different flavors of corporate finance. And I was basically striving for success. I had discovered goal setting around 2004, 2005, set my first 5-year roadmap thinking I had 3 goals, check the box, and they were all externally motivated. I wanted to have designations. I wanted to have income. I wanted to have this level of title. So for me, I placed all my hope, all my faith, and that meant that all my energy went to goal setting to the detriment of my health. I had gained 30, 40 pounds, and to the detriment of a new marriage. And then everything came crashing down around 2014 when I was involved in a car accident that took 3 years to recover from it. It involved a lot of physical therapy, had a brain injury that required just some therapy, the special therapy there, and then some vision therapy. So there was, at one point I was going to 5 to 6 doctor appointments a week. So I went from trying to, what I say, kind of brute force my life, my success together, and the cardboard facade just came falling down, and I spent many weeks on the floor just in pain. I really had to look at myself and say, wow, I was externally focused, but it was my second rock bottom moment. But for me, it was something that I had to go through to really press pause on all of the noise, all the just messiness of constructing a false identity, and really figure out who Josh was. So out of the ashes, I kind of use that Phoenix analogy.
I love it.
I have, I guess, 3 things. I have focused on who I am, so kind of finding my true identity, which includes humor, sarcasm, my voice as a powerful tool. I have also realized that fear as a hidden epidemic I use the phrase, fear was gainfully employed in my life for 30 years. So instead of running from fear, kind of turning around to say, you don't have power. And then the crux of it is using goal setting properly. We'll probably dig into the more of that later, but my prior attempts at goal setting actually caused me harm, which I didn't realize until kind of hitting rock bottom. So that's kind of my overview, more than 60 seconds, but I think gives you enough color to get a sense of where I'm coming from.
Absolutely. And that's a unique perspective. And that's what brings, that passion to the work that people like yourself do. And obviously,
absolutely,
like I do, that's awesome. Let's dig into goal stuff. My PhD thesis, started with looking at goal setting theory and the high performance cycle of goal setting theory. So this is a particular, okay. And I actually called Gary Latham, one of the co-founders of it, from University of Toronto, and he flew out to Halifax and met with me, and we had beer and burgers in Halifax. And I said, look, there's some serious gaps in this cycle in that. And, so I love that, you have a view in that on goal setting. And I told you about my first book, and we share a philosophy on this. So let's dig into the goal setting theory, and in particular, your unique approach to looking at it, and how the downside of using the SMART goal framework for you led to the development of this new framework.
Yeah, so let me, I guess, start with the backdrop of where I went wrong, which might make my framework make a little bit more sense. So in 2004, 2005 was the first time that I encountered personal development books or reading as a path to growth. I just never, I was able to speed read in high school, but I used it to skip class versus actually learn and grow. And then I was in my first management position, and we were required to read a book a month as part of this leadership kind of roundtable. And the light bulb just went off. I said, oh my goodness, it was as if I had never had a meal before, and I was starving. I was just eating and consuming this development. And I encountered books such as, there's Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week, the 80-20 principle, and things of that nature that were just sparks kind of flying off of my brain. And around 2005, I set my first 5-year goal, and they were externally motivated to, like I said, I wanted to have three designations. I wanted to earn 6 figures, and I wanted to work for Nike. Those were my 3 goals, and that was how I had defined success. And in that particular journey, I had zero consideration for the health that I was at. So I was drinking at one point 2 pots of coffee a day because I was going to school while working full time. And that had huge, my idea of a diversified food palette was going to McDonald's for lunch and Taco Bell for dinner. That's what I thought a well-rounded meal looked like, because I didn't go to the same fast food drive-through in one day, right? Just crazy.
Ethnic fast food variety.
That was the sophistication that I possessed at the time. But What I realized as I kind of hit rock bottom and reflected, I just had this epiphany that one, my goals didn't really take into account the entire person that I wanted to be. And they didn't take into account the, I guess, the identity of also who I was and where I was going. So SMART goals, I actually set SMART goals because I went through all those and I actually checked the box, but they were not heading me to the right direction. And they also were not holistic. So for me, the SMART goal framework works really well if you know that you're already headed in the right direction. But it was as if I got in a car and it was a Ferrari, and instead of driving it down to LA, down, I-5, I actually drove it right off the cliff of the ocean because I just didn't have the right direction, the right GPS coordinates. So that's where I think the major, it's not an issue with SMART goals in of themselves, but it's the application of the goals where people don't pause long enough. Because normally, my wife has a little pie chart, kind of cute graph. She's a graphic designer, so she has this pie chart, and it says 80% of people don't set goals. So when that 80% of people, that was me, 2003, going into that 2004 or 5 season, that was me. When they set goals, most people maybe go on Google or talk to a friend, and the knee-jerk reaction is go set SMART goals. So they set SMART goals thinking that is in of itself the answer. The other issue that I found in working with individuals is that normally they're high performers that they want to do more. They want to succeed and achieve, and they try to stuff everything all at once, and they don't know how to take the SMART goal of I want to be either get a promotion or they want to do something in some time period, 12, 18 months down the road. They don't know how to work it back to actually get it into a digestible chunk today, and they get frozen, and inaction causes them to lose hope. Repeated, they get discouraged and frustrated and even depressed. So for me, SMART goals work well as part of maybe a sandwich strategy where you have to know where you're going long term and then be able to work that back to more of a short term tactical execution plan.
Right. And I know my buddy Dave Klassen, he's with Athletes in Action, and he does work with the Vancouver Canucks. He was with the Grizzlies, and he's with the BC Lions, all these. So he's dealing with professional athletes. And he's the Canadian director now for this organization. And when we connected in the spring, he was talking about, now he's dealing with people who have obviously major SMART goals and have achieved kind of the pinnacle of career success, right? They're the, the 1%ers, so to speak. But he talks about how this role of identity and, strivingness, but dealing with, a lot of people that have this void in their life. And we see it with especially pro athletes or people when they leave successful careers where they had this identity and this role that was so attached to them that when they lose that, they don't know who they are. And, before coming on air, we were talking a bit about this. So maybe talk a bit about how you overcome this idea of the void, because it's good to be striving and growing and being very clear and having clarity, for focus and direction. That's what goals do. They just give us focus and direction. But they don't define us as a person, right? And a lot of times people, when they achieve the goal, and a great example is, the most celebrated athlete in the Olympics ever, and Michael Phelps, talks about how he goes through depression after the Olympics. So here's a guy that stands on the podium more than anyone's ever stood on an Olympic podium in the gold medal position, who afterwards, right, because there's 4 years in between those moments where he's in this deep depression. What do you say to those people you work with and coach that, want to have better life's goals, achievements, and successes and some of those rewards without, the risk of this void, or, on the extreme edge, depression, and the extreme case, you see people, with suicide and
Yeah.
that.
And that's definitely an issue. I dealt with depression and suicidal thoughts for a season of my life. So I can certainly, that topic is near and dear. And goal setting is easy to go to because it's external. You can put it on a piece of paper and you feel like you're making forward progress. But the issue is most people don't pause long enough for the mind game or the mind space to really figure out what's going on in between their head, which is where the real work begins.
Yeah.
Most of the people that I talk to or work with, they're not playing the victim card. They're not looking for maybe a social worker to kind of tell them that everything's going to be okay. They're striving. They're a population of people that I call restless achievers. These are people that internally they are striving to do more, but they're just stuck. And I have 4 categories. I wrote them down here off my paper just to make sure that I wouldn't have a brain freeze. But the first restless achiever is the continual learner. This is somebody who's always absorbing information. They're learning more, but they're not quite getting that unlock. So that's kind of the first category. The second category is the dead dreamer. They've dreamed of more. They've had these visions of success, but they've just maybe got beaten up, or they just haven't had that aha moment. So now they're kind of walking, almost dying a slow death each day. And then there's the externally impacted. These are people like myself that have had a car accident. I have folks that have had somebody close to them pass. And so their life has been turned upside down. And whatever path, whatever trajectory they were on feels like it's a different world. So they're just free falling. And then there's the silently fearful. These are people that externally, people are giving them credit to say, hey, you're doing a good job at work or professionally. So the people around them are impressed by what they're able to do, but inside they know that they're built for more, and they're actually playing small because there's fear is kind of gripping them inside. So there's like the 4 people those are my people. Those are kind of who I work with, the restless achievers. So for those folks, there's really two avenues, and they're all connected. So it's not usually one or the other, but the 2 hidden components are, first is false identity. Most people, whether they're in the corporate world, they've attached who they are and their value to a job title. So the first job that I have is to start to decouple, start to try to get them to see that, hey, everything you're talking to me about is your job title is your worth. Your job title is your worth. So let's talk about your family or other goals. And the second thing to work on is the fear. And that's usually a harder one. I actually did a talk about 3 weeks ago, and it was on the topic of fear and this idea of addressing your fear. I had at least 5 people come up to me before and after and tell me, I don't have any fear, or before I listened to your talk, I actually thought I didn't have any fear, and they were hesitant to even come. It was part of a larger conference, so they were required to come and kind of be there. And so there was some people that were grudgingly listening to this idea of fear. Those same people, I had a workshop or a worksheet. They had turned their page over, and on the backside of their paper, had written over a half page of things that they were fearful of, that they didn't identify as like, oh, I'm not afraid of a lion jumping at me down the street. But they're like, wow, actually, some people were moms, and we had business owners there. We had couples, we had young people, old people. And there were people that were 21 that were writing notes, and people that were 65 that were writing notes. They were fearful of either playing small in their job, or they were fearful of being maybe not the best dad they could be, or fearful of whatever the case may be. So it was interesting to kind of get that feedback.
Fear of regret.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I was talking with Aaron Hawkins earlier today.
Okay.
We talked about fear and even reframing it, right? Because fear can lead to adrenaline, and it's not necessarily the overcoming of fear or just addressing it. It's realizing it's there, but doing what needs to be done anyways. That's what will separate people. And the greater fear than the fear of the doing the thing is the fear of regret of not trying. And sometimes we just have to dip our toe in the water and start, right? Without
Absolutely.
knowing and having all the resources or knowledge needed to maybe press through. And I think that's what holds some people back when they're locked in this fear, is they don't want to do anything until they either have all the information to absolutely know with 100% confidence they can overcome it, and guarantees, well, you know, you're going to be in eternal, you know, procrastination mode if that's the case. You have to, you know, step forward despite the fear, and, you know, and use it. You know, fear's kept us alive. You know, evolutionary, and it can be a good thing, but it shouldn't be a crippling thing.
And I still think, for me, people talk about being fearless and having no fear, and I think that's a wrong. For me, it's not the goal. For me, as I look back, the fear that I was running from, because I ran for my voice ever since 7th grade, and as I look back, some of my best moments in the past year, 2 years, have been through using my voice, whether it's through podcasts, talking to people like yourself, or even writing a book and talking about that. That's, for me, the fear. And what I found is that generally what people are fearful of is a really good signal that that's where you should pause and lean in and figure out what about that is potentially what's on the other side of fear, because there's actually a lot of excitement. It's fearful because you know you should do it, and it's the equivalent of that caveman theory. And I would say to anybody in your audience, if you pause and figure, what am I fearful of? That's where your greatest accomplishment could come from. If I were to give one piece of advice, if we were to end the interview here, I would say, listen to your fear, because it's a good indicator of where your greatness may lie.
That is a great piece of wisdom, Josh. And that's a fantastic piece, because I believe that. I think we need to, you know, press forward, you know, fear or not. And, you know, on that, you know, you're currently in a executive level position with Nike, and you have a performance background in that. The work you do in helping people now, you obviously have a number of success and performance habits you do yourself. Do you want to share with some of the Hop Nation what some of your personal success and performance habits or tips are?
Yeah, I've tried, I'm always tweaking and testing and trying to figure out what works best. And I usually go through seasons, so this is not what I'm doing right now. It's working well, but it's probably something that's going to change over 6 months as my life changes. But right now, my habits, I would say there's 2 categories of habits. One or more health tactical based, and then the other is more reflection contemplative based. So the first set is my daily wake up time is 4:30 in the morning. That's where I wake up at 4:30. I get an hour to hour and a half before I need to get ready for my corporate job, and that's the time period for me. It's that kind of wake up in the morning and you know, early bird gets the worm, if you would. And that's where I find all the things I want to do. I can't do it all at once. So each day I lay up one brick, and I have very clear outcome before I go to bed. I have my working space, and we have a small home right now, and so my office also doubles as my wife's design studio. It also doubles as the kids' play area, so it is a multi-space room. But before I go to bed, I write down on my desk on a sticky note, what is the one success for tomorrow morning? And that way, when I wake up, I do have coffee preset, so everything is staged and primed for me to not have to think about any decision besides getting my butt out of bed and down to the desk without having to make one decision. So the coffee's set, coffee cup's out. I have a green alkalizing drink that I have. So I have that first, grab my coffee, go sit down. And by the time I'm even thinking about crawling back into bed, I've already been up for 10, 15 minutes. And I'm already in the zone. So that for me, it's that momentum in the morning starts with very clear preparation in the evening time. And then I usually
I
set for
love it. I love it. The startup and shutdown rituals that people have.
yeah,
The
it's
uber successful all have startup and shutdown rituals. So
it's huge.
yeah, you should pay
Water,
attention. What are your startup and shutdown rituals?
it's simple. I mean, a lot of people, they don't think about it, or they they think that your brain is going to work at the same capacity at every hour of the day, and they don't leverage the time when you're super creative. They defer that creativity or that energy till later. And I found for me that when it comes, or that inspiration comes, I take advantage of it. Whether it's in the middle of my workday, I will pause and go into a quiet room and write some notes. I've been known to get up at 2 a.m. and just wake up and have this idea pop in my head. I'm not going to remember it 3, 4 hours later when I wake up. So just get up, write it
Hopefully
down.
it's not like a Seinfeld Flamin' Globes of Sigmund moment.
Yeah. Water is huge, just to make sure that I'm drinking. I carry around a super large container of water, and I just make sure that it's always around to drink. So nothing fancy, nothing. There you go. Yep, exactly. Nothing that's overly complex. I do have a shake that's super nutritional in the morning. So I actually don't eat a lot of solid foods in the morning. I generally, what I found for me is if I have a very light breakfast, which might be a piece of toast or something, and I have my shake that energizes me, if I snack from 6 a.m. till 11 a.m., I have unlimited energy. But if I wait or even eat like a heavier breakfast around 9, my body just tanks. And that's just for me literally listening to say, trial and error, here's how I perform the best. And I found that I'm super energized from that 4:30 a.m. time. I can have my super productivity till like 11:30 a.m. Every hour past that is generally a little bit less productive. So I will block time in creativity. Time is front loaded in the morning. All of my task based, smaller items that are more multitasking, maybe where you're maybe checking email or doing things, I stage that from like 1 p.m. to 5 p.m.
Love it. I love it. So you said you had some reflective habits
Yeah.
and performance habits. Did that cover both sides?
No, there's two. Good call. So the two, I guess three. One is I have regular time, just me and myself, to reflect once a week. Usually it's Sunday evenings.
Mm.
That's just a time for me to just zoom out, unplug, and say, did what I achieved last week, was it what I set out to achieve? And if not, how do I calibrate going forward? And that idea of calibration, it's in my book. I know I just started reading Atomic Habits last week, and he has an airplane analogy where if you're only a few degrees off when you start your destination, it doesn't seem like a big deal. But if you fail to calibrate, you will end up in the wrong city or potentially the wrong country. So weekly calibration time is important. And some of those exercises are either going through like an 80-20 principle exercise where you just figure out what's causing you the most stress or excitement and double down on those activities by doing more of them or deleting them. And the start, stop, do more of. So pause, figure out what activities you should start doing. Maybe you need to start running or working out. What items should you stop doing? For me, probably drinking as much coffee needs to be a stop activity. And then what should you do more of? For me, being present when I get home with the kiddos is something I do. I want to be present every night of the week, but I'm probably good 2 to 3 nights. So I want to do more of that. So those are good weekly or once a month exercises where you should literally carve out time in your calendar, make it non-negotiable. If you start doing those, you're going to have aha moments. Most people, when they goal set, they have the New Year's resolution strategy where they do it once and they can't figure out why they're not successful. And likely it's because they just never revisited them and they just gave up without actually calibrating.
I love it. Well, and again, starting and tweaking as we go forward is just a success strategy, and getting feedback, not just
Yeah,
self-feedback, but having someone else. So we're accountable. And that's where, having coaches, I mean, everyone that's in the coaching, consulting, training field tends to have someone that they work with themselves to better themselves,
absolutely.
and anyone that doesn't, I think there's a bit of a disconnect and a credibility gap if you don't, because if you aren't practicing what you preach, to me, that's a credibility gap. So you need to have, those people that you're able to work with, and, mentors or coaches,
Yeah.
are.
And mentors for me were a huge part of my unlock. And I think it's part of the reason why I'm so passionate to not just take my aha moments and maybe hoard them and try to get a advantage over other people. For me, it was only through mentors. Both I had an in-person mentor that was instrumental, but I also had virtual mentors that I've never met before. I've traded a few emails back and forth with a few of them, but these were people that were part of my inner circle. They either wrote books or blog posts or maybe an article in Harvard Business Review. These people shared everything that they knew, and it was a one-to-many. So I consumed that information, and it made me a better person. And that that's probably the one question that I get the most is, how do I find a mentor? How do I get that? And people start getting pigeonholed to say, well, if it's not a one-to-one mentor that I can meet with once a week, it's not actually a mentor. And that's one of the big myths I try to shatter is, no, it could be somebody that is, a blog person, or it could be even on Facebook, wherever you hang out, or a book. I tend to gravitate towards books, but anybody can be a mentor, and they don't have to know it. So choose who you hang out with wisely.
Absolutely. I love it. That's a great piece of advice. So let's talk more about this. You went through your own transformation, and we're talking about how coaching mentorship can positively affect our own lives, but also the lives of those we serve. Do you have any stories of transformation and that you're especially proud of, since you've been doing the work you're doing?
Yeah, there's a couple people come to mind.
And I know this is always a tough one because of confidentiality.
Yeah, I'll just use she as a way to take out names. But there's two individuals that I would say are people that come to mind that I'm probably the most proud of, just in terms of getting an impact. But they both had a similar track. These were both were high performing individuals, but they didn't come from a fancy pedigree. They didn't come from Berkeley or Harvard or an Ivy League school. These were maybe the blue collar folks that they just had a lot of internal drive, but they didn't have anybody speaking into their lives and being able to sit down and unpack the identity and unpack the fears. And I would say that's probably the biggest unlock that each one of these individuals had, was they had no idea and had never really thought through the fear that was holding them back and how that had caused them to play small. And the biggest aha was they were waiting for other people to validate them. And that took the most work to realize, like, no, what's your worth? What's your identity? It's not your boss's job to give you identity. And in many cases, they were being given a false identity by maybe a parent that they didn't get along with, or a boss that wasn't development mindset. Their boss just wanted them to do a task, right? Click the button, do the report, and wasn't focused on helping them achieve their full potential. So helping them get grounded on pause. When you fast forward to your eulogy and you think about what you want people to be saying about you, and connect to that identity and then work that back. Forget about what people are saying you should be. That transformation was huge. And both of them ended up taking different roles because they were inspired to say, you know what, where I'm at doesn't connect to my full potential. And for me, I get the most satisfaction when I see people have that aha moment and they take that very next step. Most of the time, high performers don't have trouble with the goal setting. They need to address the hidden roadblocks, but really they try to do too much and they get frozen, and they honestly, taking that first step allows them to get momentum. So for me, I guess I say I'm the unlock guy, helping you figure out what that next step is, because high performers don't need much more than that.
You know, it's interesting because high performers are really good at the logical, the performance orientated stuff. And if they fear something, it's the softer side of stuff and the skill development and the soft skills and relational pieces. You know, bringing purpose and meaningfulness. That's where you see these people who've had success professionally, vocationally, you know, financially. Everyone on the outside looking in is, you know, be like Mike, so to speak, right? You know, and that's not a great example because I'm sure Michael Jordan's a great person, but the be like whoever, right? And following and aspiring to be this other person when they aren't even sure who they are. And, you know, high performers need it as much as anyone, because at the end of the day, we all bleed blood and none of us is perfect. We all have, you know, insecurities, fears, regardless of where we're at in our path and development. But that fear that we talked about earlier is different, I think, because, you know, for people who are used to performing at the highest level, being vulnerable is probably the scariest thing for them. And
Absolutely.
the work you did and where transformation comes is when we're vulnerable enough to say, I need help. I can't do this on my own strength. I'm here, but, you know, to get here, I can't do it. I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah. So, it's funny, you know, there's, I know I've talked to people in the past who I used to try to maybe chase individuals down and say, hey, I think I can help you. And what I realize is that some people just aren't ready to actually put down the cardboard facade and really address what's going on inside. They just want the quick fix and tell me, what goal should I set? And I found that I don't get joy from working with those individuals, nor am I the best person suited, because I just don't think that that's who I was called to serve. And there are people that's their jam. That's kind of what they were made for. But for me, you know, the restless achievers are willing to dive deep and be vulnerable, and they just haven't had the environment or the situation that allows them to start unpacking those things. And so that's what if I could do that all day, I think that's where I'm at. I would just have those conversations and help, I guess, flip the switch, right? Unlocks after unlock, because the compound effect of going from feeling restless, which has a relational leakage where you start letting that frustration, it actually starts to leak into performance at work, because you get discouraged and you get a little bit bitter, and then you wonder why you're not getting included in projects, or most people actually bring that frustration home with them, and they don't make the connection on why the relationship is suffering. Well, it's because you're actually not connected to who you are, and you're letting your roadblocks slowly eat away. So once you're willing to have an honest conversation with yourself, the path to transformation can actually be pretty quick. For me, it took me 10 years to kind of get from point A to point B. And some of that was because I was just too stubborn and too hard-headed. And that's where the car accident was probably one of the best things that happened to me, because I was forced to put all that down, pick up the good things, but it also required me to be vulnerable. And through that path, I realized like, oh, wow, there's this whole different world. I don't have to play the macho, I have it all figured out. And realizing that you don't have to have it all figured out in this picture perfect Instagram, Facebook type world where I say we have the it's all good syndrome, where we're almost programmed, or we think we have to say, it's all good, it's all good. And inside, we're just dying to have a real conversation. We're dying to talk to somebody about, how do I get through this? And I have an accountability partner, and he's an ex-NFL athlete, and we were talking about the fear and identities. For me, I attach my identity to, hey, I'm a finance guy, and so here's my job path, and if I'm not going to the next level, I'm somehow a failure. For him, he was in the NFL, and then he wasn't, and who is he, right? So unpacking those things has been a similar journey that I think many people are on, or they need to go on.
I love it. I love it. And when we're off air, I'll connect with you in regards to my buddy Steve Miller.
Okay.
He developed something called the implicit career search, and that sort of work and transformation would probably resonate with you and Nick as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of that transition identity piece, that's a big thing. And you know what? We all play different roles at different stages of our life, like who you were 10 years ago versus who you're going to be 10 years from now are, on paper and even from a beingness, different, because we evolve in that. And you can't get hung up on the point in time, because we go through different seasons and we mature, right? So I love that conversation.
There's an issue too with goal setting. One of the reasons why I use the phrase somewhat intentionally inflammatory, goal setting is dangerous if done incorrectly, because goal setting, when you talk to a lot of people, if you just pause and close your eyes and listen, what they're actually saying is, I'll be happy after, or I'll be happy when. Mm-hmm. And they defer their happiness, and they make sacrifices that they shouldn't make today, because they think that they can either repair the damage down the road, or that sacrifice will be quickly resolved. And those sacrifices, they're just dying this. They're making a really dangerous choice, but they're also losing a lot of joy and happiness where they're just not present. Where most people that I talk to and work with, one of their biggest daily issues that they have to work through is that they're just not present. They're either at home and they're thinking about their goals, or they're thinking about work. When they're at work, they're thinking about what's not happening, and they're thinking about the future, and their mind is in 10 different places. And so they're actually doing both the professional and the personal. They're not doing it very well because they're just not present. So finding a way to lower the noise, figure out what's truly important. And some of the most powerful tools that I've learned is, one, the power of no, figuring out what do you say no to. And then also subtly, but probably more powerful, is the power of not now. So for me, when I finally got through my therapy and rehab, and I figured out, not now, or not yet.
Mindset, and Carol Dweck at Stanford talks about this growth mindset, the not yet. If you're on a growth pattern, I don't know that yet.
Absolutely. And that's, most people, high performers, when they think about goals, they kind of have the kitchen sink syndrome, where they pile all their goals on and say, I want to do these 10 goals in the next 12 months. And if I'm not on track, then I'm somehow a failure. And the idea of defining your goals and saying, yes, those are good goals. But then if you were to think about them, take all your goals like this, but you got to take them sequentially and understand in what order, given your situation. Maybe you're single, maybe you're married, maybe you have kids, maybe you have a lot of kids. I don't know. But take the time that you actually can do the work that you need to do, and then just recording it out in sequence. And so for me, 2 Octobers ago, I kind of had a pause where I realized my recovery is about as good as it's going to get. I still have a hard time reading, and when I read, sometimes my eyes go haywire, and that's just a lingering effect of the car accident. But I realized that I needed to get back in the ring and start actually moving my life forward. And I had the same idea where I had a 8 by 11 sheet filled out with things that I had been excited about for the last 10 years. And then I started down the path of trying to do 5 of those in like an 18-month period. And I realized that that was just unrealistic. So I sat down, did the honest work, and I asked myself 2 questions that really helped me get clarity. One was, what will I regret not doing? If this was the last year of my life, what would I regret not doing? And that narrowed the list from 20 to about 3. And then I sat and I said, I was taking a Tony Robbins course, and his question that I still can remember when he said it to me was as if he jumped through my earbuds and had punched me in the stomach. But he said, "What must you do?" And that idea of that one word, must, for me, put all the other stuff aside, and I said, I must publish my book. And that was part of my journey last year. Was everything went to the wayside. Everything else was a not now or not yet. And I just focused on writing the book, and that allowed me to be fully present with the book, the material, and all of the surrounding, like building the website, and everything else was interesting. And I'm picking those pieces up in 2019. But those 2 questions, I think, would get people tons of clarity and realize that just because you don't do it in 2019 or 2020 doesn't mean you won't get to it.
Exactly. And people need to have, as much as we set goals of things to do, I think we need to set goals of what not to do.
Absolutely.
Or to stop do. Have a stop doing list of goals.
Absolutely.
You know, there's so many things that, you know, we think we need to add to the pile when really, like, get stuff off. You know, sometimes you need to go slow to go fast, and you need less to have more.
And that's where the weekly calibration comes into play, that if you're checking in on a regular basis, you can actually find, this shiny object came in, and I while it's still a small seed of habit, you can pluck it out and say, you know what, I'm choosing not to let that habit take root or that activity take root, and you can actually recalibrate quickly. But most people, they just never check in with themselves, and then they look back and June comes around and they figure, I am not on track, and they just give up. So by the time March or April hits, most people have given up, and by May or June, the majority of people have just shrugged their shoulders and said, I set a goal January 1st and it didn't happen, so I must be a failure. And they start giving themselves that identity of, well, I'm a failure. That trickles into everything else they're doing, right? It gets back to mindset.
They get the disease of excusitis and
Yep.
start going, oh, it just may not have meant to be. Well,
yeah.
Possibly, but more often than not, no. You're just looking for a justification for, you know, where you're at, because, you know, achievements where preparation and a plan kind of come together and get supercharged with purpose.
Yeah. If you're not thinking about mindset and is your mindset healthy, you're probably missing a big part of your unlock to get achievement, because most people are their own biggest bullies, but they've been telling themselves this negative script on repeat that they don't hear it. And one of the things that my wife and I like to use is, what if you heard somebody saying what you're saying to yourself? What if they were saying it to your kids? Would you allow that for a half a second? And the answer is no. But when it's us telling ourselves the same thing, for some reason we think, well, that must be okay. It's just an odd. So for us, that's a quick reframing where we just say, get outside ourselves and say, if we heard somebody saying that to our kids, would that be acceptable? And if that answer is a no, we have to find a quick reset, or else it's just a downward spiral.
Wow, that one was gold, man, and very powerful, very powerful. And I think it kind of zapped me, so there's probably some reflection at the end of this.
Like, all right, end the interview. We got it.
I'm like, oh crap, that was on live. Hey people, I'm human.
Yeah. But that's, I mean,
I need to hear this stuff as much as any of you. Okay.
That's where my accountability partner, he's constantly, slapping me in the face to say, you're crazy. Listen to yourself. And I think that's where there's different layers of accountability and mentorship. There's the virtual mentors that are distant that you need them. They're going to help speak into your life. And then there's the mentor that is probably one or two levels above you. They're speaking into your life. They're speaking more down to you. They're kind of putting that hand down to say, you know what, I've been there. I can help you. And I had somebody, his name was Keith, and he, phenomenal part of my unlock. And then the other layer of that mentorship is also peer-to-peer, where you find somebody or a group of somebody in a mastermind that you are running the same race with, and that lateral accountability, and you're actually holding each other's hand, and you're basically either pushing them from behind to say, keep running, keep doing this, or you're grabbing their jersey and helping them run the race and giving them that energy. Those are really the three layers. And once you have those three things, you start to run at an entirely different pace.
Agreed. I love that. Now, I'm cognizant of time. For a guy that gets up at 4:30, we're doing this in the evening. So I want to be very cognizant of that, because I really appreciate the time, and hopefully I have some time to, say the I love yous and good night to those loved ones that we were talking about.
They're upstairs patiently waiting for sure.
Okay, well, I want to make sure that I put a link to your website, and you're going to have a special page for the listeners of this podcast with some free giveaways and that. So I will make sure we add that link to this for you. But I want to hear.
Can I share what those are?
Absolutely. That's a great idea.
So you can go to catalystignite.com/Hop Nation. And I'm assuming you'll have the link in the show notes. So there, I've given the kitchen sink of what I can offer to you for free. So I have three things. One is what I call my my spark guide, if you would, where it gives both my legacy goal setting framework. So you see my 6 steps to that, but you also get a quick primer on the 3 roadblocks preventing you from success. So it's not super long, but it gets your brain kind of thinking about really a synopsis of this conversation. So that's the first. The second is chapter 1 of my book. So you can get a taste of, is this something that you'd be interested in pursuing down the road? And then I've also given you what I call my Taking Action workbook, which each chapter of my book ends in a 1 to 2 page list of things to do. Because my book is about taking action. If you want to go consume something for pleasure, Catalyst is not your book. So I've compiled all those end of chapter resources and questions and taking action frameworks into one PDF. So I'm giving you those 3 things. Just go to catalystignite.com/Hop Nation, and they're there waiting for you.
I love it. Wow, that's amazing, things. And I really appreciate you doing that for the Hop Nation. We talked a lot about professional stuff here, and, this could continue. I want to ask this question though. If you're sitting down and looking around and celebrating your 100th birthday celebration, what would you want people saying about you, Josh? And is there anyone in particular you want saying something?
Yeah, that's the first step in my legacy goal setting, is really to define who you want to be. When you get to that point, I use the phrase at your eulogy. When people are giving your eulogy, what does that look like? And for me, it's really impacted the direction that I've gone. And the answer is much different than it would have been 3, 4, 5 years ago. And it centers around a few things. One is, I would want my kids to be up talking about, not that their dad made a ton of money, but that their dad was present, and they had a bunch of fun, silly, quirky memories. And for us, they know, they introduce me at school when I drop them off as, oh, my dad, he's a jokester. Like I want them to say that 10, 20 years from now, right? I would want my wife, Lisa, to stand up and say, man, he was supportive, loving, and compassionate. I would want people that I've worked with and coached and mentored to stand up and say that he served and made me a better version of myself. Those are really, for me, the three things that make a difference. We had talked earlier about my three goals I set back in 2005, and working for Nike was on that list. And it's funny because I actually got a job working with Nike last year. And it's interesting where I really cherish the opportunity to work for Nike, but it's not my identity. It would have been my identity 5 or 10 years ago, but because it's not my identity, I can show up and not get consumed in working 10, 12, 13 hours a day trying to prove myself, and really knowing that, yes, corporate success is part of my journey. But to be honest, I don't want to die or get to 100 and say, I wish I would have worked more, right? I want to be somebody who lives to their full potential and help other people live to theirs as well.
I love it. Thank you very much, Josh. You're a great man, and Lisa and your kids are very lucky to have you in their life, and looking forward to seeing you when I do my road trip.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Here in March. Looking forward to connecting. Just want to thank you for the time. Thank you, Hop Nation, for listening in on Josh McLean from Catalyst Ignite. And we look forward to checking in with you next week.